Right, HS2, to be or not to be. We've got Peter Barnes in the studio. Peter is from Wigan. And you think what, Peter?
I think it's about time that we scrapped HS2. I think it's been a catastrophic failure from the start. It's at what point do we have to cut our losses? If we look at the initial estimate, it was worth 45 billion at the beginning. Now, the 2019 it was estimated to be 100 billion. And the guy who did that report just last night argued that it might be even 180 billion. And to put that into context, that's the same amount of money that we spend on primary, secondary education and our defence budget combined.
Why do you care? Why do you care? As long as it's built. Why do you care?
Because at what point do we have to... Because we can't just keep throwing money into bad projects.
You're from Wigan. Yeah. You need this train.
This is the thing. Every time I go back up north, people always ask me about politics and they always ask me about, all this kind of stuff. Not one person in the 5 years I've lived down here has asked me about HS2. Not one person up there even probably realises that Wigan is going to be on the line. There are much better projects that this money could have been funnelled into to actually that would have helped people right now.
Sort of what I don't understand, I see a lot of the building going on in the south of England, and when I go out into Watford or beyond, and I see all this. Is there any building happening north in the Manchester? Any ground being broken there?
There are small little plots of it, but hardly anything of any substance. And this is one of the biggest problems that we're having. There's the HS2 kind of PR team. They say like all these little northern companies are getting involved in all this project, but in reality, there's not real work being done because one of the major problems of HS2 is the planning system. It's absolutely
that's why people aren't asking you about it because they can't see anything to deal with it.
Let's include Ellie Phillips in this, who's from Liverpool. Glad we've got two northerners together. And Ellie, you really think this just shows how sort of London-centric Rishi Sunak is being?
Definitely. At the moment, if it stops at Birmingham like it's planned to, that's just a commuter train. But this is all meant to be part of a levelling up project. And it is costing a lot of money, but that's taxpayers' money, and we're forgetting about the taxpayers up north at the moment, and that's who it's meant to be for. So it's meant to be creating, up to 90,000 jobs. Are those jobs not needed up north? And it's the long-term impact. So I think it's like, yes, the initial outlay is enormous, but we know the government's happy to waste money on all sorts of other things. This isn't a waste of money. Yes, it's going to cost more than it should, but that's inflation. Again, you could...
Ellie, I remember when they said this about the Millennium Dome, and they said every major...
Channel Tunnel. Did you know that?
The M25, that's it. That's HS1, And, so there's always other ways for them to waste this money. I don't sit and look. I don't go with Peter's argument that it's such a waste of money, so therefore we'll claw all this money back and it'll be put to good use. No, it'll be poured down the drain like everything else.
I think if it stops where it is now, then it is a waste because it's not connecting the whole of the country. It's not linking everyone together. The difference for me that it would change, that you could get up to the north in an hour rather than over 2 hours. And also what's available at the moment is just completely subpar, would change a lot. And also, a lot of the costs could be offset by the fact that it can take freight as well. So my husband's a freight forwarder, and the fact that you can put that on trains reduces the carbon emissions from that, and the costs can be offset for travellers. So it should bring the cost down of prices of tickets, but actually still pay back the money in the long term.
And it frees up capacity on the East Coast Line.
Massively. If you travel up north, if you can manage to pay for a ticket because they're so astronomically expensive, often you have to sit on the floor, you have to stand half the time. So there's definitely a demand there, and hopefully this would mean that it frees up for other people. And also, I just think, why should the north be completely cut off? If it was built the other way round and it was, from Liverpool to Birmingham and then London was cut out, everyone would be outraged.
There'd be uproar about it.
Peter, can I ask you from a political point of view? I mean, I'm not involved in what goes on in Downing Street, but my suspicion is this decision's been made. They're shelving it. They're saying that people do not realise how bad the finances are, but they're too afraid to mention it before the Tory conference next week. And he's going to make his Chancellor announce it in the autumn statement. Does that make it any more palatable to swallow? Because I believe Johnson also wanted to get rid of it as soon as he came in. And then he got talked down by the same angry mob. So I'm just asking, really, do you think that this is going to actually happen? Or
well, I have to admit, I think you are right. I do think this decision has definitely already been made, and I think because of the Tory conference, I think that it's being withheld a little bit. But if we don't forget that Dominic Cummings under Boris Johnson wanted to actually have a review of HS2, and I remember that set off the same mobs on both sides of this argument. But I do think politically this is I don't know whether they're going to shelve it or whether they've just like we say, they've spent that much money on it that they don't have a choice but to continue with it.
Do you think it's an embarrassment? Do you think it's a badge of shame that as a nation we have this terrible rail system? Worse than you do, Ellie.
It's awful. It's absolutely awful. My sister now lives in France. To get around that country is so much easier, so much cheaper, so much more effective. And I think for us, for me as a northerner, I now live down south, I think connecting the north and the south is so important. There's a huge northern-southern divide. And, for example, we were chatting outside and I was saying that it's not just for commuters. It's not to say, oh, well, you could live in Liverpool and work in London. It's to say, when I want to do a weekend away with my friends, we go, an hour outside London because, you know, it makes it worthwhile. Well, if you can do that up north, then you're encouraging people to go up there, visit there, and that only strengthens the infrastructure up there.
I see myself as a northerner. I lived in Manchester for 7 years. My son lives there now. My heart and soul and life of Manchester United.
Traitor.
No, I've never seen myself as a southerner. I never identified London as somewhere where you have to work. It's not where you want to live. But the idea that this divide, or that somewhere it's a bit backward up north, I mean, you only have to go and you can see the suburbs of Manchester and Cheshire and all sorts of places. But this whole business of Liverpool and Newcastle and Leeds and whatever in the east not being connected properly the way it should be, it is a national disgrace.
It is. It really is. And I also don't think, that the North should have to choose between the Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2. Like, why should it be completely disconnected? I think actually
I have to admit that I do agree with. But the one thing you kind of have to remember is when we look at the actual statistics of who kind of would use this service and who uses public transport, particularly in Greater Manchester, most people don't use it in the way that we do in London. When the way that people talk about it is a very London-centric way. The main mode of transport in Greater Manchester is roads.
Yeah, but that's
and
because is that chicken and the egg? You build it and they will
that's
come.
something what people go on to argue, but that's not the case. The most common way that people, because of the greater distances that people travel than you do in London, and it's just one of those things that whilst everybody keeps thinking the future of it is trains for connectivity, it's actually roads, and it's one of those things that we actually
Well, you would build more roads, Peter, would you?
Oh, definitely. I'd have put, the amount of money that Andy Burnham's wasted on this B network nonsense, I'd have flooded it into kind of building proper roads, resurfacing all the roads. I tell you right now, he'd walk the next 3 mayoral elections over it. It is one of the biggest issues is actually the quality of roads and the traffic and the congestion. And you could argue, if we had better trains, then get the train. Most people would choose not to take it. The stats prove that.
I don't agree with that. I think long term and since COVID and beyond, attitudes have changed, and actually you can be productive on trains, you can get stuff done. You can't do that when you're driving. So actually the quality of time spent is better. And also at the moment, for example, it's cheaper to fly from London to Liverpool than it is to get a train. That's not good for
I'm going to say,
anyone. And then when driving is cheaper to drive from London to Liverpool than get a train at the moment. So that needs to completely be overhauled, and hopefully HS2 will help do that to bring the cost down and make it
so
faster.
you would plough ahead, and Peter very definitely...
I would stop it.
But you'd stop it. OK. Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it.
That is our contributors' views. And here are some of your views on email and on video. Let's take a look.
All this HS2, let's scrap it, should we keep it going? Of course we should keep it going. Where I live, there's disruption, they're cutting down the woods, they're cutting down all sorts of things, digging tunnels, they're repossessing houses. That's called progress. We have to do these things. We're Great Britain. Go all the way to Scotland for me, absolutely.
HS2, like the majority of rail projects in the UK, aims to satisfy the London business community and its insatiable appetite for staff. The other problem is the cost of rail travel, unless it's heavily subsidised, means it's not a cost-effective, viable option for commuters in the north.
HS2 was sold on the merit of connecting the Northern Powerhouse to London, and if that very part is now no longer going to be part of the entire plan, then you've got to question, what's the benefit? We can get from Birmingham to London within an hour and 10 minutes already. So why continue doing that if they're going to scrap the top part? It's baffling that this government has managed to mess this up.
Why can we do nothing? Why can we get nothing right? Why is it left to the Victorians and the Edwardians